Will you pray with me? May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be acceptable to you, O God, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. My friend Carol, not our Carol, but a different one, tells the story of when her pastor's 8-year-old daughter announced that she would no longer be going up for the children's sermon. When her mom asked, "Okay, honey, why not?" she said the answers are always the same: God, Jesus, and love. She's not wrong, is she? We sure spend a lot of time in this place talking about God, Jesus, and love. And because we've spent all this time talking about God and Jesus and love, we know a thing or two about the kind of love that Jesus is talking about in this morning's gospel reading. When Jesus says, "This is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you," we know he is not talking about the pining and passion of pop songs, nor is he even describing that tender affection that we feel towards our families and friends. No, we know that this Christian love is an active kind of love, a love that sees a hungry neighbor and feeds them, a love that goes to the one who is thirsty and gives them something to drink. That's the point, right? The rule: love one another in action and deed. And don't get me wrong, it's true. But friends, I've been a little bit disturbed by this week's readings because I'm coming to believe that Jesus might be asking us for more. That he might be asking us to love one another in our intentions and our motivations, and that is much harder. It's one thing, right, to do a good turn for a neighbor, all the while grumbling against them and calling them who knows what behind their back. But it's a whole different thing to try to love that person in thought and motivation, to will and desire the good for them, to love them from the inside out. The commandment Jesus gives us as his disciples is not just love one another, but love one another as I have loved you. And if our love is to resemble the love of Christ, it will be more, won't it, than just occasionally doing good deeds for our neighbors. The story about my friend's pastor's daughter and children's sermons reminds me of a story of my own about our epistle reading from John. When I was in elementary school, 10 years old maybe, I got a hold of a Bible and started reading it on my own, which can be a very dangerous thing for a kid to do. I mean, have you seen what's in there? Y'all remember last week with all that stuff about eunuchs? Fortunately, the passage I turned to was not Deuteronomy 23, but rather 1 John chapter 4. The part you just heard Stacy read where it says, "Those who say I love God and hate their brothers and sisters are liars. For those who do not love a brother or sister whom they have seen cannot love God whom they have not seen." This seems like a good time to mention that I have 2 younger brothers who I love dearly, but whom at the time I considered the bane of my 10-year-old existence. Here's the best part. This Bible I'd gotten a hold of was an old translation, maybe the RSV, I'm not sure. So it did not use inclusive language, which means the passage did not read, "Those who say I love God and hate brothers or sisters." It said, "Those who say I love God and hate their brothers are liars." The word of the Lord was speaking directly to 10-year-old me, it seemed. And then I saw on the opposite page, 1 John chapter 3, verse 15, "All who hate their brothers are murderers." Y'all, I slammed that Bible shut, looked around. Oh no, I thought. I think God is watching me. And I think God might have found me out. This is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you. Friends, this feels like an impossible task sometimes, doesn't it? My childhood self may have been right to shake in her shoes, because how does one love and pray for the good of people who seek to do us harm? And I was sure those pesky little brothers were out to do me harm, right? Love one another as I have loved you. Not just in action, but in intention and motivation. Last week, a friend of mine reminded me of a story where a group of Christians learned to practice this impossible task and found that just as Jesus promised, it did indeed bear good fruit. That's the story of the Civil Rights Movement, which many of you know and perhaps remember, was founded on the principles of nonviolent civil disobedience. Love one another, love your neighbors, love even your enemies. Late Georgia Congressman and civil rights leader John Lewis writes in his memoir, Walking with the Wind, about the extensive training that he and his fellow activists went through to cultivate and practice this kind of love. They met weekly in the basement of a Methodist church in Nashville to pray, talk, learn, practice, even engage in role plays in this kind of nonviolent resistance. And I think it's instructive for those of us who seek to walk in this hard path of love, that for Lewis and his fellow resistors, this kind of love was indeed a practice. It's not something we could just show up and do on a whim. No, Lewis said, the organizers met weekly over the course of years to pray and study and work, and it showed. When other activists came in to join them later in the game, or when out-of-towners showed up to help with a protest, you could tell who had done the work and who had not. Their motivations were different, and so, even subtly, their actions were different, too. Years later, Lewis recalls his teacher's instructions in those nonviolent trainings. He would say, you have to do more than just not hit back. You have to have no desire to hit back. You have to love the person who's hitting you. You're going to love them. Friends, honestly, I don't know if I am capable of that kind of love. But I do believe that Jesus is asking us to try and practice that kind of love. And yes, sometimes I do get discouraged and overwhelmed by this commandment because I get tired, I get depleted, maybe you do too. Sometimes my reserves run low and I think I just don't have it in me to love people like that. Not this person, not right now. And yet maybe there is something that I'm getting wrong about this impossible task. Maybe it has nothing to do with my reserves, my love, my capabilities. Because it turns out love one another is not the first instruction Jesus gives us in this passage. First, he says, as the Father has loved loved me, so I have loved you. Abide in my love. This first imperative, abide in my love, comes before the second, love one another. And I think that might be because we have to practice them exactly in that order. Because we need to be loved by God in order to love one another. Because that divine love is our source and our strength. We have to fill ourselves up from the fountain of love before that love can overflow into the world around us. Author Debbie Thomas puts it this way. She says, "My problem is that I often treat Jesus as a role model and then despair when I can't live up to his high standards. But abiding in something is not the same thing as emulating it. In the vine and branches metaphor, Jesus' love is not our example, it's our source. It's where our love originates and deepens, where it replenishes itself. In other words, if we don't abide, we can't love. Love one another, Jesus says, but not from your own resources. Only love creates love. If we would love one another, our neighbors, even our enemies, first we must abide. First, we must let God love us. John Lewis and his colleagues in the civil rights movement accomplished remarkable things. And when they met in those church basements for nonviolence training, they did not start with strategy, study, or simulation. They started their work with prayer. So, friends, let us abide. Let's connect to the source. Let's fill up on the love that sustains us. And then, once we're full, let's get out of here and overflow that love into God's good work. Thanks be to God. Amen.